There are people out there who are particularly sensitive to pain and suffering. They feel it and are aware of it in ways that are different from normal, let's say. So they perceive pain and suffering in a unique way, not like other people. Those are a very good candidates for Buddhist practice. People like that uh, react to their sensitivity in all sorts of different ways. Usually they succumb, they give in and they suffer, become depressed, or surrender one way or another. So the reason I say that they are very good candidates for Buddhist practice is because if they get the point, they realize first of all that there is a way out, that there are things to do in order to overcome pain and suffering. And secondly, if they have the wisdom, motivation, and faith, the panchendriya in general, if they have that, then they can devote their lives to the overcoming of pain and suffering. In a Buddhist way, of course, which is the best way I know of for that kind of people. For people who have no issue with pain and suffering, who are not even aware of it. People to whom, or in whose experience, in whose consciousness, pain and suffering doesn't sit or exercise the same kind of impact as those sensitive people. They have no problem. Usually they are never interested in religion or spirituality in the first place. I mean, in the authentic sense of what that means. But people like that, they are bound to be, or bound to relate to suffering in a very substantial way. And that's why if they come across Buddhism in life, and if they see the point of it, if they really understand what it is about, then they are in for a treat. And it's very likely for people like this to see their interest in the Buddhist doctrine and its practice, not just conceptually, but also in something that they are to apply in their everyday life. It's very likely for their interest in this to increase in the course of time, especially as their sensitivity towards pain and suffering doesn't go anywhere. It usually actually increases in the course of time as we age. And so we become more and more interested to do something about it. This is precisely what Buddhism is. It's a prescription of what to do with pain and suffering. And there is no better prescription. There's no better way out or way of negotiation with pain and suffering. Since ancient times till the present, Buddhism is the highest point at which you could say a human being or humanity has reached wisdom regarding this issue. And I'm here taking into consideration, modern contemporary psychology, psychotherapy, etc. I know all about this, and it doesn't even come close. So this is the highest point. This is the best that you could get, unless you come up with your own thing. Then please share that with us, because we'd be very curious, very interested. So I suppose the Buddha himself was that kind of person, highly sensitive to pain and suffering, even if he doesn't experience a lot of pain and suffering himself. But I suppose that anyone who is like this, anyone who exhibits that level of interest, of depth of contemplation of pain and suffering, probably experiences that himself in ways that are even hard to imagine. And this seems to have been also the experience of highly accomplished practitioners that we know about, who share some of their insights and experiences with us. However much rarer this is, unfortunately, we need a whole lot of more of that sharing of actual practice experience. But we know that they suffer a lot. We know from the stories of Christian renunciate and ascetic saints and practitioners and so on. We know that they suffer a lot and endure a lot of suffering. And these are the ones who we know about. I mean, there are probably many more in different areas of practice, also in Sufi, among Sufi practitioners. There is a lot that we know. There is so much more that we don't know about. People who never share their experiences or relate to others what they pass through along the path of practice, and each in their own different ways, of course. And so pain and suffering is a very essential dimension of the renunciate and practice journey. And I say this because, of course, we must learn how to settle with it. Or as Teresa of Ávila would say, we must learn how to befriend it and how to welcome it. Welcoming pain and suffering, of course not going out to seek it, but just when it happens, to realize that this is it. This is the journey. This is its nature. It's not about feeling good and love and kindness and all that horse shit. It's not about any of this. That's not what leads to deliverance. What leads to deliverance is to learn how to settle with pain and suffering, how to accept it. If you can do something about it to reduce its intensity and its severity, you could do that, of course. That's a Buddhist practice, how it differs from Jain practice. Don't do anything to hurt yourself. But when there's nothing that you can do, stop complaining. Stop fighting. Swallow it. Provided that you do so consciously. Remain aware. It feels bad. It feels the opposite of good. But that's how it is. That's the nature of the journey. Not comfort or pleasure or good feelings, even if they are of spiritual nature, even if they are of the nature of the Brahma Vihara. That's not what leads to deliverance. This leads to rebirth, even if it's going to lend you into the angelic realms. That's not what we're in for. That's not what we're doing this thing. There are so many other ways aside from renunciation and abstinence and withdrawal that will lead you to the angelic realms still. Well, that's the real reason we survive anyways. I mean, if you think about it, nobody does, but if you think about it, why do we survive? Why do we have to survive? Nobody knows, nobody asked the question in the first place. People just survive, they just do it. Because there is this biological program that mobilizes us forward like that, just like any other animal. You would need to have a reason not to survive. You would need to have a reason in order to bring your life to an end, willfully, voluntarily. What happens involuntarily is to survive, is to live, is to put food in your mouth and sleep and go to the toilet and the rest of it. That happens automatically, spontaneously, involuntarily. And that's partly why we never pause for a moment to ask ourselves that question. Why are we doing this? What is mobilizing us? That's what the meaning of avijja is. That's what avijja is. All those things that we do without ever asking why, or without ever even becoming aware of them. But the thing about suicide, now, in someone who comes to that moment where their survival is no longer something that they wish to do anymore. Now, if you really think about it, people who commit suicide do it not because they want to die. That's a very simplistic way of looking at it. People who kill themselves do it because they don't want to have this life. They don't want to live like this anymore, and they believe that they don't have any other options. The idea of non-existence, the idea not to exist, is inconceivable for the human consciousness. It's inconceivable. It's not something that you can conceive of, the state of non-existence. Suicide is a desire to live differently, to live independently from this life. The act of suicide is not an act of a desire for non-existence. People who commit suicide actually want to live, but they don't want to live like this anymore, and they think that they cannot live like this anymore, and that there are no other options. And it is usually centered around the perception that I can't deal with this anymore, I don't want to deal with this anymore, and I have no reason to try anymore. This is the main theme in suicide. I can't handle it, or I don't want to handle it, or I have no reason to handle it. It's actually a failure to live with pain and suffering in one form or another, one in intensity or another. It's a desire to drop that. It's a desire, actually suicide is an attempt to do something about pain and suffering, simply by not playing the game of life anymore. But if you think about it, it's a desire, and desire is a manifestation of life. It's so strange, I know, it's confusing, but the act of suicide is a desire for life, simply. It's a desire to live independently from pain and suffering. Does it work? No, from our Buddhist perspective it doesn't, because what you get is rebirth. Basically punishment. You're going to come back to life, and you're going to be at exactly the same psychological condition that you left in the previous life. This is a continuum. Nobody can do anything about that. Suicide doesn't change anything. Where you stop is precisely where you start over. The exact same psychological conditions and features, characteristics that the future life inherent, intact. Nothing changes. And so it's just a waste of time, isn't it? Doesn't change anything. There is no other way to transcend pain and suffering except only through wisdom and through a transcendental course of life. That's why we lead a renunciate way of life. That's why we lead a life of abstinence and withdrawal and so on. Pushing it to the farthest possible limit, you know, until we begin to feel that we can't sustain it anymore, and then we stop there, because we have to remain human after all, this is not something to celebrate. It's a disaster, actually, is what it is. We're limited by our humanness. And so we push it as far as possible. That's how the practice goes. But you will see that these limits are expanding in the course of time, until the human being is transcended. That's what Nibbana is. We're no longer bound by our animalistic, substrate, fundamental condition. Other religions will have this as transforming into godhood, or melting, or becoming subsumed in godhood, leaving the human behind. Now these are described in the Buddhist doctrine in very remarkable psychological terms. The cosmological side is not particularly emphasized, or we lost the way that the Buddha described these in cosmological terms. We don't really have substantial cosmological descriptions of deliverance, but psychologically that's what we have, and that's what matters, because this is what gives us the prescriptions, the teachings, the practices that we have to follow. The psychological dimension is far more important than the cosmological. And again, you see it very clearly. It's all about how to handle pain and suffering, how to coexist with it, how to negotiate with it. And that's the path of practice. All other options, taking antidepressants, committing suicide, doing rituals and practices of that sort, including, of course, the discourses of love and compassion and kindness and all these things that are meant to make you feel good, or indulging in pleasures, going in a hedonic direction. All these prescriptions to avoid pain and suffering, nothing works, doesn't work. Slows you down, it gives you wrong ideas, solidifies a certain idea of ego, idea about who you are, ideas that you have about yourself, whatever ideas, that you're benevolent, that you're kind, that you're compassionate, that you are helping others. All these means by which are expected to make you not feel pain and suffering. Looking away, looking the other way. That's that function of these things. And that's why they're popular. Why do you think people are hedonic? It's not because they believe in hedonism, it's because if they are not, they'll end up facing pain and suffering. Why do you think people act kind, act compassionate, talk about it all the time, non-stop, kindness, 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 love, love, love? Why do they do it? Because if they don't, they will end up facing pain and suffering. They will end up faced with an idea or with a reality of themselves that they would do anything to avoid facing, that they can't handle. But that's not the way of practice. The way of practice is to face reality, not only as it exists in the world, in this thing that we call the world and that we perceive and that is incredibly heavy and horrible, but also our own selves. But to act as if I'm good, virtue, benevolence, I am that, identifying with that. Well, that's the way of escape. It's not a way of transcendence. Now, the noble task, the true task at this point, is to learn to observe yourself and to learn what is it that within yourself that is pulling you away from pain and suffering like this. What are the patterns, the mechanisms that are dug deep in your psyche that have transformed into habits of behavior and thought and feeling that are pulling you away from facing pain and suffering like this? And it's not difficult to know. What's difficult is to have the will and the desire to genuinely and honestly know. And this is the purest level of self-awareness and of really knowing oneself. You really want to understand yourself. Look into that self of yours, on that which is constantly pulling you away from facing pain and suffering like this. Usually, it is something that you insist on, that you think that you cannot live without, something that you highly value and highly regard, something to which you ascribe lofty and vital meaning and value, and so on. And it is something that that would immediately make you suffer and make you convulse with pain and anxiety and fear if you just be presented with the mere thought of having it taken away from you. That's how you understand yourself, and that's how you learn how you've become conditioned at the deepest recesses of the unconscious to keep holding on to life in a certain specific way. This is the task. For some people it's very difficult even to know where to begin. But in the course of time you begin, these things begin to manifest, they begin to appear. And that's what noble practice is, and that's what true practice is. To a degree or another, it requires that you deprive yourself of certain things that you might not even think that are worth taking note of, let alone depriving oneself of. And that's why a transformation of the way we live, a transformation of our way of life, lifestyle, is important. Because it's usually simple things like this that will show us what is it that we insist to have or insist to be. Because it is in these things that the compulsions of our psyche are hidden. If you want to face pain and suffering, and if you want to face them on the deep level of the unconsciousness, on the level where your true self is conditioned, then you have to do this. You have to deprive yourself of that which you, or that which causes horror in your heart, to a point where you might think that I can't bear life without this. I can't live without this. This is what makes me live. It's precisely this that you want to begin to shake at the root, because these things are deeply rooted. There is no other way to transcend pain and suffering. If there is still anything that you insist on, that you think you cannot live without, that you hold on to, you must let go of that too. And that process is itself painful and leads to a lot of suffering. But there is no other way. I'm not saying jump with both feet in this sort of practice. It's more like wading into a swamp, step by step. That's how it feels. But that's what needs to be done. And the swamp goes deep. It goes incredibly deep, and you will think that you're drowning in it. Mara will give you that impression. You keep going this way, you're going to drown in this swamp. That's the voice of Mara. You'll never drown. You never drown. So long you maintain that level of self-awareness and wisdom and understanding. You keep going, step by step. Take that step forward. Don't think that you will be submerged by the water. Don't fear it. Until the task is done.